I'm Gail Dixon. I'm one of the owners of the bookstore with Shannon Burgess, who's right there. The bookstore has been here since 1960, and we are owners number 5. So we have quite a history. We actually just purchased the store in January. I feel my face flushing, so excuse me. Anyway, the person that we purchased it from had been here for 20 years as the owner. She had been here for 32 years as an employee, and she was turning 70, and we approached her and said, hey, if you ever, not that we're pushing you out the door, but if you're ever looking, we are interested. Our daughters both worked here through high school. We have fabulous teen employees. That's Grace and Rachel behind the counter. Typically, it's their turn to blush. Typically their first job in high school, they open the store, close the store, open our safe, which is from the original grocery store in town, which our building is one of the oldest buildings in Glen Ellyn. And so our safe is this thick, not kidding, the doors, and it's crazy back there. So very grateful to our teens. We're grateful to all of you for coming, and we were so excited when Sarah approached us. This is our kind of second big event of the year. We apologize. We're a very spatially challenged store, so we apologize that only a few of you are able to sit, but there's not enough room for the crowd that Sarah was able to generate, which I think says a whole lot about you. So we're very excited for you. Sarah asked me to just give you a brief update, a brief introduction to the store, and then also to introduce her. I have to say, she's incredibly organized, more organized than we certainly anticipated, and that's been very, very helpful. We've all read the book. We loved the book. We had our teens read it. Sarah was kind enough to bring us copies, and the verdict was... Oh my gosh, I loved it. It was so good. So you've got your audience. You've got them down. It's been great. A little bit about Sarah. Sarah Donovan listened to stories before she began to tell them. Those of you who know Sarah as a teacher might not know that she was first a social worker in the county jail for almost a decade before becoming a teacher. You may notice the mental health themes in Alone Together. She earned a master's degree in education and a PhD in English from the University of Illinois, Chicago. And she has been a junior high teacher for 15 years and a teacher educator at DePaul University for 7 years. She's a popular teaching blog, Ethical, do you say ELA? Ethical ELA, where she shares stories from her classroom. And this year she was invited to be a columnist for the National Journal on Adolescent Literature, the Allen Review. She's a local, national, and international speaker on young adult literature, traveling all the way to Bosnia to talk about the power of books to heal. She has published a book on teaching genocide literature with Rutledge, and Sarah is now an author of a young adult verse novel which brought you all here, and that is Alone Together. So congratulations and welcome.
Thank you, Gail and Shannon and Rachel and Grace. I'm so happy that we were able to have this event here in a local bookstore. And I'm so thankful that Shannon and Gail have taken on the responsibility of keeping this bookstore alive for the community. I can't tell you how important it is to have a place to walk to with your children or your spouse or your family or even on your own and browse the shelves for the best sellers, but then find something that you didn't anticipate and then love that. So I appreciate, I saw some of you browsing before, and you can browse a little bit when we're finished and maybe share the love of books by buying a few tonight. And I see that a lot of you already have bought a book tonight, so I thank you for that. And well, I want to thank you all for being here. It's Tuesday night. It is 7 o'clock, and it's during the school year, and it is beautiful outside, and we've been waiting for this weather for a really long time, and yet you're all here sitting together. And it's beautiful that you all are coming to listen to me talk about this book. Some of you knew me when I was a child, or growing up, and you may not have imagined that I would be standing here right now. I certainly did not. I was kind of peculiar. quiet, an introvert. I didn't read very much. I didn't write very much. I had a lot of stories in my mind, which is sort of what made me kind of peculiar. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I really learned what books can do and what writing can do. So I'm kind of amazed that I'm here right now, but I think I wouldn't be if it weren't for all the stories that I've been able to listen to over the years from my students and my family and a lot of people in this room. So let's talk about the book. How many of you have read? Okay, so about half of you, which is wonderful. Thank you so much. I think I'll just say a little bit about where it came from. So I'm a junior high teacher, and I know a lot of you are teachers in here. The thing is, not everyone comes to junior high wanting to read books. If you have any teenagers at home who are sort of reluctant, they may say things like, reading's boring, or I don't like to read, or I don't have time to read. And I heard lots of these stories in the last 15 years from my students. And I thought, you know, my challenge has always been to find those books that the students can grab their attention and that they can finish and feel really good about it. And I thought that I wanted to write that story for them. And I also wanted to write that story for adults who also might think you don't have any time. And you don't, because you're very busy, and we're all very busy. But I think what happens when you sit down with a book for what you think is going to be, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and you feel the world kind of slow, and you kind of settle into the book, and before you know it, an hour has passed, and you've been sitting still, and you've been visiting another world that's different than yours or beyond your own, or you, for whatever reason, find yourself mirrored back in that book. And for whatever reason, your way of being has been shifted because someone has told a story for you, and because you have found that time to sit down and read it. And so I wanted this to be one of those books where you could sit down maybe once or twice and finish that book. And I hope that you found that once you kind of started reading, time flew, and then you were at the end of the book and feeling quite satisfied. So it's a quick read, but I wouldn't say it's a light read. It's sort of heavy, emotional, sensitive. So it should cause some kind of stirring when you read it. And that was my intention. The second thing that you'll notice when you open the book is that it's written in verse. And what does that mean? So if you're, for quite a few people, I saw really nice reviews about the book saying that they had never read a book in verse before, and that they were pleasantly surprised by what it was. And so a book in verse is a book that is written in poetry form, and each poem can sort of stand alone, but together they tell the story as a whole. And if you notice, there's not a lot of text on the page. So for anyone who sort of opens up a book and you see lots of small print and it's really tight together and you're like, oh my gosh, my eyes are hurt, before I even get to the middle of the page, and then you get sleepy. This feels more invigorating because there's space on the page for your eyes to rest, and every word matters. And so that was my challenge in writing this book, is that every word had to be important, and which is just as important as every word that I left out, that I wanted to leave for you to add or for you to wonder about. So I think there might be some parts where you're left wanting more explanation, but it was deliberate on my part to just sort of leave some space for you to rest your eyes and enjoy the poem that by the end told a story. So verse was the second thing. So what is this book about? Well, this is about a 15-year-old girl. Her name is Sadie Carter, and it's her sophomore year in high school. And she's typical in many ways. She wants freedom. She wants a little cash in her pocket. She wants privacy. She wants her own bedroom. She wants to figure out what her purpose in life is. She likes boys, too. And so in many ways, it was really fun writing a typical teenage girl. However, she's not all that typical in other ways. So she comes from a really big Catholic family. Her parents' marriage is falling apart. Her siblings are going through different experiences growing up. Kind of their lives are unraveling in different ways. And the way that Sadie has made sense of who she is in her family is by, following some rules and keeping order and kind of staying under the radar and not making too many waves. But once her older siblings start leaving the house, it becomes harder for Sadie to stay under the radar and to ignore the dynamics of things that are going on in her family. And so these wants that she has in her life, I write about them as whispers of want. And these whispers of want kind of get louder for Sadie to the point where she starts making some mistakes. So I'm going to read for you the first poem of the book where Sadie gets arrested, which is certainly not her plan and not in line with her good girl persona that she has earned in her family. So the book starts in August, and I'm going to read it. Arrested. I knew he'd come. He'd be the one. Because Mom's always at church these days. Because he's always in the garage these days. I knew he'd be stoic as he shook the hand of the police commander, a 6'6" Santa Claus with the badge. Nobody speaks for what feels like forever. I say a silent prayer. For what? I don't know. God has more important things to worry about these days. Dad leans back in his chair, crosses his legs. I notice his overgrown toenails, stretching just beyond the sole of his 2 small flip-flops. Places his hands behind his head, and I notice the stench of several shower-free days seeping into the silence. Santa runs his hands through his silver hair, smooths out his beard, blue eyes taking note of this father-daughter dynamic. Today's my last day, says Santa, and it looks to me like you could use a break. I'm not sure if he's talking to me, if he's talking to Dad, but my hands are praying for some miracle. Santa tosses my violation in the trash. Santa stands to shake my hand, and my fingers are lost in his palm, and I swear his blue eyes twinkle as he says, make better choices, Sadie. Christmas in August, I think. A Christmas miracle, I think. Until Dad finally breaks his silence to say, got a few bucks for gas? I'm not sure if he's talking to me, if he's talking to Santa, but Santa takes out a 10 and hands it to Dad. So Arrested was not the first poem that I wrote in this book, but it was really important because, and I think it gives you a glimpse of how the book is set up in all these little snapshots where Sadie's observing the people who are part of her life, but she's not really making sense of it. She doesn't really understand what it means or where it comes from. And in this book, Sadie's father is in pretty serious depression, but nobody really talks about that. And she's in a very much an observant kind of mode. And each poem is her observing the world around her, where little by little she's pushed to start making some sense of what's going on in her place in the world. So I wrote in the book for several characters to come and help Sadie make sense of her life, because she's been kind of isolating herself and sort of estranged from engaging with the people in her world. And so the police commander was sort of the first person, but then there's a teacher, Mr. Manicotti. And no, Mr. Manicotti is not his name. Mr. Manicotti is the name of the man who comes into the restaurant where Sadie works, and he orders manicotti. And he's also her nosy teacher. So any of you who are teachers, you have probably got up in the business of your students a little bit to find out what's going on in their lives, and Mr. Manicotti will not let Sadie alone and is kind of pushing her a lot. And he's an important character. So there's also her godmother, who is a great mentor and sort of on the peripheral, kind of supporting Sadie a little bit at a time. And then there's a boy. Okay, 2 boys. Neither is quite right, but both are very important. in helping Sadie kind of make sense of things. And then I would say maybe the most important character are not really characters at all, but a whole bunch of books that help Sadie kind of break out of her life beyond the Carter family and try to understand the world a little bit better. So she needs all these different people and places to help her gain some perspective and make sense of all the things that she's observing. So there are parts in here that are uncomfortable, and they're supposed to be. But hopefully by the end, she's made sense of things, and those of you who've read it see where that goes. Now, I wouldn't say that I, being in my 4th decade, have answers, just like Sadie doesn't really have any answers. But I would say that it is up to me alone to make decisions. But I can't really make those decisions unless I have the perspectives, and the perspective comes from friends and family and experiences and books and all those kinds of things. So I'm still figuring out who I am, and just as Sadie's figuring out who she is. And that's where Alone Together kind of comes from. Like, it's kind of up to us to figure it out, but we need life experiences and perspectives to make sense of things. So I could go on and read more, but I'm interested in hearing if you have questions or comments or passages you'd like me to read, or maybe you would like to read. So who would like to read in?
Sarah, did you have the whole storyline from beginning to end in your head before you started, or did you kind of flush out the storyline as you wrote the verses?
I had the middle really well thought out. I did not have the beginning. And the beginning came to me after doing some reading, where I read a lot, and there was one day where I was struggling to write, so I spent some time reading, and in that I kind of came up with how I was going to begin. But the ending, the ending was the hardest part, because I wrote it 3 times. Like, I wrote one, I'm pretty sure Diane read that one. I wrote a second, and I don't know if Tammy Potts is here. Yes, she read the second one. And I wrote a second/third, and Gary Anderson back there read it. And I kept kind of going back and forth, and then finally we had like a phone conference with a few of my readers, and we kind of talked through whether or not it makes sense, or, because it was very hard because it's not an ending. It's hard to find a place to end, and I think, so that I did not have until quite a few revisions.
What inspired your story? What was the kernel that you started?
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
I'm going to read it and then I'll explain. Okay. Is that okay?
You're the author.
Okay, so here, I'm glad that you asked that, because I was really wanting to read this and I wasn't sure if I was going to go. Okay, anyway. It's called The Psychology of Hair, but it wasn't always called that. Mr. Manicani is not his real name. It's just what he orders when he comes into the restaurant to grade papers and flirt with Barb, the waitress he's dating. He wants us to keep a journal as part of our psych grade. He gives us daily prompts to explore our inner thoughts. Write about your best part. I can't. So I write about my worst. As a little girl, I had wavy hair, curls bouncing as I ran through the park, dangling as I hung upside down from the monkey bars. And as a little girl, I have colics. Yeah. Growing in different directions from the rest, resisting being combed flat, my wild locks looked like a lion's mane, roaring away order until my mom would say, "Line up, it's shampoo day." The youngest girls would gather on the kitchen floor, seated cross-legged, waiting our turn to be lifted to the counter, lay back, head over the sink, rest our head in our mom's strong palm, listen to her bracelet music as she lathered our locks. And when it was my turn, "Tangles," she'd cry, and I'd cry, and she fought through my curls with lather and disgust as the neat row of sisters fidgeted in fear. And then the day came when the tangles were too much, too disruptive. And so I marched with numbers 10 and 11, and a few bucks, a few blocks, curls bouncing, as I jumped over sidewalk cracks so as not to break my mom's back, a mission to tame the unruly curls and put an end to the tangles. My curls were cut into a bowl-shaped coif, just like that. No longer a little girl, I have learned to fight my colics and curls, to tame the unruly with hair dryers and flat irons, gels and mousses and sprays that I buy myself. But when the humidity heightens, little curls still spring up around my brow. Smooth tresses begin to frizz, a wave reappears just at my chin. So I actually wrote that poem with my students in 2014. We were having a free write time in class, and I like to give some suggestions for what people can write. And I did say, like, write about your best part, and then I sat down and I realized that it's hard as a teenager, it's hard as a grown woman to write about something that you like about yourself. We're so trained to find our flaws. And so the hair came up, and I remembered that story, and I actually talked to my sisters, Jennifer and Jamie. There's a picture of the three of us, and we all have the same haircut. A bowl. But the bangs aren't straight. The bangs are like a colic. So that poem I wrote 2014 with my students. It was about me, and I felt like it was very symbolic of the way we try to flat iron the curls of our life, and that it's very symbolic for how things are unruly, and then life always reminds you that you can't control it, doesn't it? So that was kind of the heart of it, and I wanted that poem to be really symbolic of Sadie trying to create order as she moved through the story. Yeah. So that was the first poem that I wrote, and then that's why the middle was good, but I didn't know the beginning of that. Other questions?
I have a two-part.
Okay.
I am curious what the hardest part was for you process-wise, like actual writing, and then emotionally.
Well, process-wise, I would say challenging, but in a really positive, invigorating way, was figuring out the arc, plotting it out. I knew that I wanted it to be 11 months, one to represent every family member. And so I knew where the beginning was, and I knew where the end was, and then trying to connect things across. So as I was writing, I did have a table of the months kind of out on my, like I had the months laid out. And if something happened in August or September, I wanted to make sure I circled back to it. So I wrote a note in like May or June, that I wanted to make sure I wrapped that up. I'm always amazed when the writers who have like 1,000-page books, how they keep track of everything and don't lose the thread. So you get to the end, or what happened to that character, or what happened to that. So I was nervous about that, and I kept like plotting down those things as I worked through it. But it was a nice challenge to kind of do that. And then emotionally, yeah, in a positive way, I liked writing and it was emotional, but I enjoyed writing the kissing parts. I really did, because honestly, as a teenager, I did not have any healthy relationships. I did not, I don't recall being treated in a very nice way. I don't recall having a particularly beautiful kiss when I was young. I wanted to write it like as a present to Sadie, to have like a really nice kiss. And to have like some nice boys in there, like treating her well. So it was emotional for me, but I really love that I now can write that. And I couldn't have written that 21 years ago. I couldn't have written that.
Speaking of numbers, I love that you refer to people as like number 10, number 11, you know, like there was such a symbolic meaning to that in addition to like the literal birth order. That was really cool.
Thank you. You know, early readers had different ideas about that, but it's a way of keeping track. You know, in verse novels, we talked about this in my class a little while ago. All the students read a verse novel during April, so we had like 100 different verse novels going. And when we kind of debriefed and said, you know, what's the genre of that book, or what's interesting about that book, or what's the subject of that book, and does it work with the verse? Very few of those were fantasy or sci-fi, because you have to create these worlds and have all these characters. And how do you write a verse novel with all these characters in it? And the best way was the numbers, though I didn't mean it to dehumanize anybody, I just meant it was overwhelming.
Can you name 2 or 3 that you thought that did it well, verse novels, that helped to shape your idea of what a good verse novel was?
Yes, well, Stop Pretending by Sonia Sonis was one of the earliest verse novels that I read, and why it was really important to me was because it wasn't very plot driven. It was sort of these snapshots of moments with her sister that was going through sort of a psychotic break during the time. So that was really important to me. I also liked House Arrest. It's a more modern, K.A. Holtz wrote that book, and House Arrest was a great one for me to see how to write it in an intimate kind of first person, that talking to the reader explicitly. And there was one that I'm drawing a blank on the name of it right now, that was broaching a subject that I thought was maybe too sensitive for students, and I wasn't sure if I could write that because it was very raw, but reading that gave me permission to try to just be as honest as I could when I was writing. So some of the more youthful, middle grade verse novels versus some of the ones that are a little bit older, and the one who wrote, who's the one that writes the really gritty ones, like, that are really long?
Ellen Hopkins.
Ellen Hopkins, yeah. Like, I couldn't go there, but I did want to take some risks, and I didn't want it to be that long. But I wanted it to be accessible. So yeah, I read a lot.
Have you ever had any negative feedback from family or anybody else?
Yeah, I have had, well, as far as reviews go, none of those have come yet. Because most of the people who have been reading it know me, and I think they're being very generous with me.
Rightfully so.
But when my family read it, we had to have some conversations about, or mostly everyone had to read it on their own first, and have some space with it, because a lot of the snapshots in that book come from raw memories that I had, so I write them very vividly, whereas some of my older sisters didn't remember that, and some of my younger sisters didn't know that happened. And so there were some questions about, like, was that true, was that not true, what's fiction, what's real, and I didn't always have the answers because I didn't know what was me trying to make sense of things and what actually happened. And I think that's part of, again, why verse is important and why books are important, is because we're trying to make sense of what happens. No one is like documenting exactly what's happening as it's happening, and even when you do that, you don't know if it's real. So then coming, kind of checking in with everybody and saying, you know, how do you feel? Is this okay? Was this helpful? And I think having some of the people who married us, our brothers-in-law, read it, I think the feedback from them was that it was very much helpful in getting a perspective of what it's like to grow up in a big family that our people outside the family didn't really understand. Oh yeah, one more.
Do you have a favorite poem from your book?
I do have it, but I'm not going to read that one because it's, you know, it's about kissing. But I will read this other one that actually came up today because I was supervising the lunchroom because we're having some problems with our seventh graders. And but it was nice to be able to go around and say hello to everybody, the students that and I was like, where is so-and-so? Because she usually sits in one area, like, oh, she went to the a la carte line. And so when she came to class, I said, oh, I didn't see you in lunchroom. Where'd you go? She's like, I got Pop-Tarts. And I'm like, what did you say? And she's like, I got Pop-Tarts. I'm like, there are Pop-Tarts and people are still eating Pop-Tarts. And she said, yes. I'm like, well, I have a story to tell you about Pop-Tarts. And this is the story. It's called Stealing Pop-Tarts. And this is maybe a good one to end on before we. You know how Pop-Tarts have 6 in a box? Well, 6 of anything was never enough in our house. When I heard the garage door open and the sport about roll in to the non-workshop side of the garage, I'd turn off the TV and race to help Mom unload the boxes and bags of groceries from Aldi. Sister Sadie is a good helper. I'd always offer to put away the boxes: cereal, hamburger helper, and Pop-Tarts. When I saw Mom's back turned and the coast of siblings was clear, I removed a package of 2 tarts and hide it behind the canned carrots, which nobody ever ate. And in the middle of the night, when the last of my siblings slumbered on floors, I'd hide in the bathroom and enjoy my Pop-Tarts in peace. No one ever suspected Sister Sadie. That was a moment, right?
That's awesome.
Okay, so we're gonna, if you want me to sign your books, I would love to sign your books for you. I'm gonna sit back there, and you can drink wine and beer and eat the lemon squares that my husband made for you. And there's cookies from Gail and Shannon as well. And of course, beautiful books to browse. And if you need suggestions, there are beautiful teachers over here who know all the young adult literature and the middle grade books that are back here, and they can give you suggestions. And there's wonderful picture books that my niece and nephew have already dug into that you can check out. So should we just
Yeah,
go?
so Sarah's gonna go back.